There are countries that produce great footballers. And then there's Brazil. 4 generations. Brazil has given the world players who didn't just win matches. They changed football forever. From impossible free kicks to breathtaking skill. From elegant playmakers to relentless goal scorers. Brazil has always played the beautiful game in its own unforgettable way. In this special edition of True Footballing Icons, we're celebrating 5 Brazilian legends whose influence is still felt across world football today. Roberto Carlos, Rivaldo, Socrates, Bebeto, and Marcelo. 5 different players. 5 different stories. 1 extraordinary football nation. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the greatest moments from 5 true Brazilian footballing icons. Roberto Carlos, the man who redefined what was possible. The ball was traveling away from goal. Thousands inside the stadium thought the chance had gone. The goalkeeper didn't even move. Then the impossible happened. Nearly 30 years later, football fans still replay the moment. Scientists have studied it. Players have tried to copy it. And people still ask the same question. How did Roberto Carlos do that? Because for his entire career, Roberto Carlos made the impossible look normal. And in doing so, he changed football forever. Before Roberto Carlos, fullbacks defended. They stayed in position. They protected their goalkeeper. Then Roberto Carlos arrived. And suddenly everything changed. Born in Garca, Brazil, in 1973, his journey began far from football's grandest stages. As a child, he helped his family by working on coffee plantations. Life wasn't easy. Money was limited. But he had something special. An incredible left foot, explosive speed, and the belief that anything was possible. As he developed, coaches quickly realized he wasn't a normal defender. He attacked relentlessly. He ran endlessly. And he struck the ball harder than almost anyone in football. Goalkeepers feared his free kicks. Defenders feared his pace. Managers feared giving him space. Europe soon came calling. His first major move was to Inter Milan. But football history almost took a different path. Inter looked at Roberto Carlos and saw a defender. Real Madrid looked at Roberto Carlos and saw a weapon. One coach believed he attacked too much. Imagine that. A manager thinking Roberto Carlos moved forward too often. Years later, football fans would ask, what if Inter Milan had understood what they had? Instead, they let him leave. And Real Madrid gladly welcomed him. At Madrid, Roberto Carlos found the perfect stage. The Bernabeu, Champions League nights, packed stadiums, the Galacticos. And week after week he delivered. The tackles, the assists, the overlapping runs, the thunderous strikes. Then came France, the moment that would define his career. The ball sat over 30 yards from goal. The angle looked impossible. The distance looked impossible. The whistle blew. Roberto Carlos ran forward and unleashed a strike that football has never forgotten. The ball appeared to be traveling wide. The goalkeeper barely reacted. The crowd watched. Then suddenly the ball began to bend. More, and more, and more. Until it crashed into the net. The stadium erupted. Football had never seen anything quite like it. It wasn't just a goal. It was football's greatest magic trick. But Roberto Carlos was far more than one free kick. At Real Madrid he won league titles, Champions Leagues, and became one of the defining players of an era. Alongside Zidane, Figo, Ronaldo, and Beckham. He helped build one of football's greatest teams. One statistic captures just how unique he was. Roberto Carlos scored more than 100 professional goals. As a left back. Even today, that sounds unbelievable. Then came 2002, the World Cup. Brazil arrived with enormous expectations, and with players like Ronaldo, Rivaldo, Ronaldinho, and Roberto Carlos, they looked unstoppable. Match by match they moved closer, until finally Brazil lifted the World Cup. The boy who once worked on coffee plantations had become a world champion. Yet perhaps his greatest achievement wasn't a trophy. It was influence. Can you imagine telling a modern fullback they aren't allowed to attack? Today it sounds ridiculous. Before Roberto Carlos, it was normal. After Roberto Carlos, everything changed. Young defenders wanted to score goals, take free kicks, create chances, attack without fear. The position evolved because of players like him. Football has produced faster players. Football has produced stronger players. Football has produced players with greater technical ability. But football has rarely produced anyone quite like Roberto Carlos. Because years later, people still ask about that free kick. How did it bend? How was it possible? The truth is, Roberto Carlos spent his entire career doing things that didn't seem possible. And that is why Roberto Carlos will always remain a true footballing icon. Not because of one free kick. Not because of the trophies. Not because of the World Cup. But because he changed football forever. Before Roberto Carlos, fullbacks defended. After Roberto Carlos, they attacked. Before Roberto Carlos, defenders followed the rules. After Roberto Carlos, they dreamed bigger. Roberto Carlos didn't just redefine a position. He redefined what was possible. What is your favorite Roberto Carlos moment? Some footballers enjoy the big occasion. Some footballers survive it. Rivaldo lived for it. When the pressure grew, when the stakes became greater, when millions were watching, Rivaldo became even better. Because throughout his career, one thing became impossible to ignore. When football needed something extraordinary, Rivaldo delivered it. Born in Recife, Brazil, in 1972, Rivaldo's journey was never meant to be easy. He grew up in poverty, often undernourished as a child. Many doubted whether his slight frame could ever survive professional football. But greatness has never been measured by size, only by courage. And from the very beginning, Rivaldo played with fearless belief. The kind of belief that cannot be taught. Where others saw impossible, Rivaldo saw opportunity. After making his name in Brazil, Europe came calling. Deportivo La Coruña became his first step. Then came Barcelona. One of football's biggest clubs. One of football's biggest pressures. And Rivaldo embraced every second of it. Barcelona didn't just sign a great player. They signed their leader, their match winner, their inspiration. When Barcelona struggled, they looked to Rivaldo. When they needed creativity, they looked to Rivaldo. When they needed a goal, they looked to Rivaldo. Again, and again, and again. What made Rivaldo different wasn't simply his talent. Football has always had talented players. It was his belief. Most footballers see an impossible opportunity and choose the safe option. Rivaldo never did. He believed impossible goals were there to be scored. Impossible passes were there to be played. Impossible moments were there to be created. And then there was his left foot. Perhaps the greatest weapon of his generation. Defenders knew exactly what he wanted to do. They knew he wanted to shift the ball onto his left. They knew what was coming. The problem was, they still couldn't stop him. Long-range screamers. Impossible volleys. Free kicks. Curling finishes. Thunderous strikes. Delicate chips. His left foot wasn't just a weapon. It was an event. In 1999, football recognized his brilliance. Rivaldo won the Ballon d'Or. the highest individual honor in world football. For one season, he wasn't simply one of the world's best players. He was the world's best player. Yet the greatest night of his club career was still to come. Camp Nou. Barcelona against Valencia. The final league match of the season. Lose. And Barcelona miss out on the Champions League. Everything rested on one night. The pressure was unbearable. But pressure had never frightened Rivaldo. It inspired him. He scored once. Barcelona still needed more. He scored again. The tension only grew. Then came the moment football will never forget. The ball dropped from the night sky. His back was to goal. 90 minutes were almost complete. Most players would have brought it down. Most players would have looked for a teammate. Rivaldo didn't. He launched himself into the air. A perfect bicycle kick. The ball flew into the top corner. The new camp erupted. Hat trick. Victory. Champions League qualification secured. One of the greatest individual performances football has ever witnessed. Because when football needed something extraordinary, Rivaldo delivered it. Then came the biggest stage of all. The 2002 FIFA World Cup. Brazil's golden generation. Ronaldo. Ronaldinho. Cafu. Roberto Carlos. And quietly, Rivaldo. History often remembers Ronaldo's 8 goals. It remembers Ronaldinho's magic against England. But Brazil do not lift that World Cup without Rivaldo. He scored 5 goals. Created countless chances. Linked every attack. Controlled the tempo. Made the right decision at the right time. When Brazil needed calm, Rivaldo gave them calm. When Brazil needed quality, Rivaldo gave them quality. When Brazil needed brilliance, Rivaldo delivered it. Throughout the tournament, he never looked rushed. Never looked nervous. Never looked overwhelmed. The bigger the occasion became, the calmer he looked. That confidence spread through the entire team. Because when Rivaldo had the ball, Brazil believed. Opponents believed too. Not because they expected him to do the ordinary. Because they feared he might produce something extraordinary. One touch. One strike. One moment. That was all he needed. Football has produced faster players. Football has produced stronger players. Football has produced bigger personalities. But football has rarely produced a player who thrived under pressure quite like Rivaldo. Some players become legends through consistency. Some become legends through longevity. Rivaldo became a legend through moments. Moments that made supporters leap from their seats. Moments that made commentators lose their voices. Moments that children tried to recreate in parks and playgrounds all over the world. That is football's greatest gift. Creating memories that never disappear. That is why Rivaldo will always remain a true footballing icon. Not because he won the Ballon d'Or. Not because he became a world champion. Not because he scored hundreds of goals. But because when the game demanded something extraordinary, Rivaldo delivered it. Again. And again. And again. Some players wait for the perfect moment. Rivaldo created it. And that is why his greatest goals will never simply be remembered as goals. They will be remembered as moments that reminded us why we fell in love with football. What is your favorite Rivaldo moment? Imagine being one of the best footballers in the world, and deciding that wasn't enough. While other players spent their evenings recovering from training, Socrates was studying medicine. While other footballers avoided politics, Socrates challenged a dictatorship. And while other captains led with shouting and aggression, Socrates led with intelligence. Football has never seen another player quite like him. Socrates was not simply a footballer. He was a doctor, a thinker, a rebel, and one of the most fascinating figures the game has ever known. Born in Brazil in 1954, Socrates grew up in a household where ideas mattered. Books mattered. Education mattered. Football was important. But it wasn't everything. That alone made him different. As his footballing talent developed, so did his academic ambitions. Most future stars chose one path. Socrates chose two. While climbing through Brazilian football, he also studied medicine, eventually earning a medical degree. Think about that for a moment. A qualified doctor, playing professional football, at the highest level. Even today, that feels almost impossible. Yet for Socrates, it was simply who he was. And when he stepped onto a football pitch, he played with the same intelligence he showed away from it. Watch Socrates for 5 minutes and something becomes obvious. He wasn't trying to play faster than everyone else. He was trying to think faster than everyone else. His greatest weapon wasn't pace. It wasn't strength. It was understanding. A pass nobody else could see. A flick nobody expected. A back heel that changed the direction of an attack. A moment of genius hidden inside a simple movement. At Sport Club Corinthians Paulista, supporters quickly fell in love with him. Not because he looked like a superstar, but because he made football look beautiful. Every touch seemed deliberate. Every pass seemed intelligent. And every match felt capable of producing something unforgettable. The goals were memorable. The assists were brilliant. But what people truly remember is the elegance, the calmness, the feeling that football somehow looked easier when Socrates was involved. Yet what made him unique wasn't happening on the pitch. It was happening off it. Brazil in the early 1980s was living under military rule. Many footballers stayed silent. Most believed they should stay out of politics. Socrates disagreed. At Corinthians, he became one of the leading voices behind a movement known as Corinthians democracy. Players voted. Voices were heard. Decisions were shared. It became about far more than football. Most footballers use their voice after retirement. Socrates used his while he was still one of the most famous players in the country. That took courage. Because speaking out is easy when nothing is at risk. Speaking out when millions are watching is something else entirely. And for many Brazilians, Socrates became a symbol of something bigger than sport. Freedom. Hope. Change. Yet despite everything happening away from football, he remained one of the world's best players. For Brazil, he captained one of the most beloved teams ever assembled, the 1982 World Cup side. Alongside legends like Zico, Falcao, and Junior, Brazil played football that felt almost impossible. The passing, the movement, the imagination, the joy. They didn't just play football. They played the game the way people wished football could always be played. Fearlessly, creatively, beautifully. And at the center of it all stood Socrates. Tall, bearded, elegant, leading with intelligence rather than force. Brazil did not win that World Cup. But something strange happened. The team became immortal anyway. Because football supporters often remember beauty longer than victory. And few teams have ever been more beautiful to watch. Later, Socrates played in Europe with Fiorentina, but his legacy had already been secured. Not through trophies. Not through statistics. But through influence. Because football has produced faster players. Stronger players. More successful players. But football has never produced another Socrates. A man who proved intelligence could be powerful. A man who proved footballers could stand for something. A man who showed that the game could be about more than winning. Across his career, he scored goals, created magic, inspired millions. But perhaps his greatest achievement was proving that a footballer could also be a thinker. That football and intelligence belong together. And that is why Socrates will always remain a true footballing icon. Not simply because he was brilliant, but because he refused to be just a footballer. What is your favorite memory of Socrates? Some footballers are remembered for power, others for pace. Bebeto was remembered for something much simpler: joy. Every touch, every pass, every goal. He played with a smile that reminded the world why people fall in love with football. Elegant, intelligent, clinical. He didn't need to overpower defenders. He simply outthought them. This is the story of the joy of football. José Roberto Gama de Oliveira, known to the world as Bebeto, was born on the 16th of February, 1964, in Salvador, Brazil. Growing up in a country where football is almost a religion, the ball quickly became part of everyday life. Like so many Brazilian children, he dreamed of wearing the famous yellow shirt. But dreams alone aren't enough. Only extraordinary talent could take him there. His professional journey began with Vitória before he moved to Flamengo. It was here that Brazil first witnessed his remarkable ability. He wasn't the tallest striker, nor the strongest. Yet defenders constantly struggled to stop him. Why? Because Bebeto understood space better than almost anyone. His movement was exceptional, his finishing calm, his intelligence extraordinary. He always seemed to arrive in exactly the right place, at exactly the right time. Success soon followed. State championships, goals, individual awards. His reputation continued to grow. Wherever he played, the goals arrived. Supporters admired not only how often he scored, but how effortlessly he made the difficult look simple. As the years passed, Bebeto became one of Brazil's most consistent forwards. His partnership with fellow attackers flourished. His confidence grew. But it was his move to Europe that would introduce his talent to an entirely new audience. In 1992, he signed for Deportivo La Coruña. At the time, few expected the Spanish club to challenge the country's traditional giants: Barcelona, Real Madrid, Atletico Madrid. Yet Bebeto had other ideas. Almost immediately, he transformed Deportivo. His movement confused defenders. His finishing thrilled supporters. His goals turned belief into reality. The 1992-93 season announced his arrival. The following year, he reached another level. Bebeto finished as La Liga's top scorer. 29 league goals. One of the finest individual seasons ever produced by a Brazilian in Spain. He helped Deportivo challenge for the league title until the very last day. Although the championship slipped away in heartbreaking fashion, supporters had found their hero. Even today, many still regard Bebeto as one of the greatest players ever to wear the club's colors. While his club career continued to flourish, something even greater awaited. Brazil, the nation that expected nothing less than World Cup success. Pressure unlike anywhere else in football. Millions watching, millions believing, millions demanding victory. Alongside Romario, Bebeto formed one of football's greatest strike partnerships. They complemented each other perfectly. Romario brought instinct. Bebeto brought intelligence. One thrived in chaos. The other created order. Together, they terrified defenders across the world. The stage was now set. The 1994 FIFA World Cup in the United States. Brazil was searching for their first World Cup in 24 years. An entire nation expected its heroes to deliver. Bebeto wasn't just about to play in football's biggest tournament. He was about to create one of its most unforgettable moments. The summer of 1994. The United States. The FIFA World Cup. Brazil carried the hopes of an entire nation. 24 years had passed since their last World Cup triumph. For a country that lived and breathed football, that felt like an eternity. Leading the attack were two very different forwards. Romario, the ruthless finisher, and Bebeto, the intelligent creator who always seemed to be exactly where he needed to be. Together, They formed one of the most feared strike partnerships in world football. Brazil began the tournament with confidence. Every match brought greater belief. Bebeto wasn't chasing individual glory. He was doing what he had always done. Working tirelessly. Creating space. Linking play. Scoring when his team needed him most. He understood that winning mattered far more than personal recognition. Then came the quarter-final against the Netherlands. One of the tournament's greatest matches. With the score finely balanced, Bebeto found the breakthrough. He calmly finished to give Brazil the lead. But it wasn't the goal that the world would remember. It was what came next. He ran towards the touchline. Rocked his arms like he was holding a baby. Romario and Mazinho joined him. Together, they celebrated the birth of Bebeto's newborn son. It instantly became one of the most iconic goal celebrations in football history. A moment of pure happiness. One that has been copied countless times ever since. Brazil continued their march towards the final. Waiting for them. Italy. Two footballing giants. 90 minutes couldn't separate them. Neither could extra time. For the first time in World Cup history, the final would be decided by penalties. The pressure was unimaginable. Every kick carried the weight of a nation. Bebeto stepped forward. Cool. Calm. Confident. He converted his penalty with the composure that had defined his entire career. When Roberto Baggio's famous penalty flew over the crossbar, Brazil were champions of the world. The dream had finally become reality. For Bebeto, it was the greatest moment of his career. A World Cup winner. The pinnacle of football. But he wasn't finished yet. Success with Brazil continued. He helped his country win the 1997 Copa America. Then the 1997 FIFA Confederations Cup. Adding more international honors to an already extraordinary career. Whenever Brazil needed experience, intelligence, and composure, Bebeto answered the call. His club career also continued across Europe and South America. He represented Sevilla, Flamengo once again, Cruzeiro, Botafogo, Vasco da Gama, and several other clubs before finally bringing an incredible playing career to a close. Wherever he played, one thing never changed. Goals followed. So did smiles. Because Bebeto never forgot why he started playing football in the first place. He played because he loved the game. By the time his career was coming to an end, his achievements spoke for themselves. A FIFA World Cup winner. A Copa America champion. A FIFA Confederations Cup winner. La Liga's top scorer. Hundreds of goals. One of Brazil's greatest ever forwards. Yet despite everything he achieved, people still remembered something more. The joy with which he played. Because sometimes, the greatest legacy isn't simply winning. It's making millions of people smile while you do it. Lifting the World Cup is where many football stories reach their perfect ending. For Bebeto, it became the beginning of an even greater legacy. By now he had earned the respect of football supporters all over the world. Not through arrogance. Not through controversy. But through consistency. Every manager knew exactly what Bebeto would deliver. Intelligence. Movement. Goals. And complete professionalism. What made Bebeto so special wasn't incredible speed. Or overwhelming strength. It was his football brain. Long before defenders realized the danger, Bebeto had already moved. He found space where none appeared to exist. His timing was almost perfect. He drifted between defenders unnoticed. Then, with one touch, the ball was in the back of the net. He made goals look effortless. That is one of the rarest talents in football. His partnership with Romario remains one of the greatest strike partnerships international football has ever seen. They understood each other instinctively. One dropped deep. The other attacked the space. One created. The other finished. Then they swapped roles without saying a word. Watching them together felt natural. As though they had played side by side their entire lives. Four defenders. They were almost impossible to contain. Bebeto finished his international career with Brazil having scored 40 goals in 77 appearances. An extraordinary return for one of the most competitive national teams in football history. Every goal came with intelligence. Every performance with humility. He never demanded attention. He simply earned it. His influence at club level was just as significant. especially at Deportivo La Coruña. Before Bebeto arrived, few imagined the club could challenge Spain's biggest powers. After he arrived, they believed anything was possible. He transformed expectations, inspired teammates, and gave supporters memories they still treasure today. For many Deportivo fans, Bebeto isn't simply a club legend. He is one of the greatest players ever to wear the famous blue and white shirt. As football evolved, forwards became faster, stronger, more physical. Yet coaches continued to study Bebeto, because movement never goes out of fashion. Football intelligence never becomes outdated. Young strikers still learn from the way he timed his runs, found space, and stayed remarkably calm inside the penalty area. Those qualities remain priceless. So, what made Bebeto different? Was it the goals? The trophies? The World Cup? Perhaps. But there was something even greater. He reminded us that football is meant to bring joy. Every celebration, every smile, every clever pass, every perfectly timed finish. He played with a freedom that inspired teammates and entertained millions. Even under the pressure of representing Brazil, he never seemed to lose that childlike love for the game. Very few players manage that. Today, when supporters remember Bebeto, they don't only remember the goals. They remember the baby celebration, the smile, the partnership with Romario, the World Cup, the happiness he brought to every stadium he played in. Because football isn't only about winning, it's about creating moments that live forever. Football has produced countless great strikers. Some were feared, some were powerful, some were unstoppable. Bebeto was something beautifully different. A footballer whose intelligence, elegance, and love for the game made him one of Brazil's greatest ever forwards. He didn't just score goals. He reminded the world why football is called the beautiful game. That's why Bebeto will always be remembered as the joy of football, and above all, a true footballing icon. In the summer of 2007, Real Madrid faced an impossible challenge. For more than a decade, the left side of their defense had belonged to one man, Roberto Carlos, a player whose thunderous free kicks, blistering pace, and relentless attacking runs had made him one of the greatest fullbacks football had ever seen. Replacing a legend is never easy. Replacing Roberto Carlos seemed almost impossible. Yet Real Madrid believed they had found their answer. An 18-year-old from Brazil named Marcelo. Fresh from Fluminense, Marcelo arrived in Madrid carrying enormous expectations. Not because of what he had already achieved, but because of who everyone expected him to replace. From the very first day, the comparisons began. Could he become the next Roberto Carlos? Did he have what it took to wear the famous white shirt? Or had Real Madrid made a mistake? The pressure didn't stop there. Back home in Brazil, the questions were exactly the same. Roberto Carlos had owned the left-back position for both club and country. Now a teenager was expected to follow in his footsteps. It was a burden few young players could have carried. Marcelo wasn't the biggest. He wasn't the strongest. And defensively, he still had plenty to learn. Critics questioned whether he was ready for a club where anything less than success was considered failure. Some believed he would never live up to the expectations placed upon him. But Marcelo had never wanted to become the next Roberto Carlos. He simply wanted the chance to prove he belonged. What nobody realized was that football wasn't about to witness the arrival of another Roberto Carlos. It was about to discover the world's first Marcelo. Life at Real Madrid was nothing like life in Brazil. Every training session, every match, every mistake was judged under the brightest spotlight in world football. Marcelo's talent was obvious. His close control, fearless dribbling and creativity made him look more like a winger than a defender. But that was also the problem. Many questioned whether he could actually defend. Real Madrid managers weren't completely convinced. Fabio Capello often preferred the experience of Gabriel Heinz. For Marcelo, opportunities were limited. He could have let the criticism define him. Instead, he chose to learn. He studied the demands of European football. He worked on his positioning, his decision-making, his fitness. Slowly, the exciting teenager began to mature into a complete fullback. Each season, he looked more comfortable in the famous white shirt. Then came the moment everything changed. When the established players moved on, Marcelo didn't just fill the space they left behind. He made the position his own. The Bernabeu, once unsure of their young Brazilian, began to fall in love with the joy he brought to the game. Every burst down the left wing, every clever flick, every impossible piece of skill. He played with a smile that reminded people football was meant to be enjoyed. The comparisons with Roberto Carlos hadn't disappeared. But something was changing. People were no longer asking whether Marcelo could replace a legend. They were beginning to realize he was creating a legacy of his own. By the early 2010s, the question had changed. People were no longer asking if Marcelo could replace Roberto Carlos. They were asking something entirely different. Had Real Madrid found a player who was rewriting the role of a left-back? Marcelo didn't play like defenders of the past. He attacked with the freedom of a winger, created chances like a midfielder, and possessed the flair of a Brazilian street footballer. His first touch, his close control, his confidence to take on defenders, made him one of the most entertaining players in world football. Then came one of football's most devastating partnerships. On the left wing, Marcelo and Cristiano Ronaldo. Whenever Ronaldo drifted inside, Marcelo exploded into the space behind him. Time and again, his overlapping runs stretched defenses to breaking point. Together, they became one of the most feared combinations in Europe. His performances helped Real Madrid enter one of the greatest eras in the club's history. La Liga titles, Champions League triumphs, Club World Cups. Again and again, Marcelo was at the heart of it all. Not with thunderous free kicks or unstoppable power like Roberto Carlos, but with elegance, imagination, and a smile that never disappeared. The comparisons that had followed him since arriving in Madrid slowly faded away, because football fans had realized something. Marcelo wasn't trying to become the next Roberto Carlos. He had become something even more special. Marcelo. Conquering Real Madrid was one thing. Winning over Brazil was another challenge entirely. For years, the famous number 3 shirt had belonged to Roberto Carlos. Now, it belonged to Marcelo. Every performance was measured against a legend who had helped Brazil win the 2002 World Cup. But Marcelo never tried to imitate him. Where Roberto Carlos relied on explosive power and thunderous strikes, Marcelo relied on intelligence, technique, and creativity. He proved there was more than one way to become a great Brazilian left-back. Representing Brazil, Marcelo featured in World Cups, Copa America tournaments, and helped his country lift the 2013 FIFA Confederations Cup. He also captained his nation on occasions, becoming one of the senior figures in a talented generation. Although international football never brought him the World Cup trophy that Roberto Carlos had won, his place among Brazil's finest defenders was no longer in doubt. Back in Madrid, the trophies continued to arrive. Champions League after Champions League. League titles. Club World Cups. By the time he wore the captain's armband, the teenager once asked to replace Roberto Carlos had become one of the most decorated players in Real Madrid's extraordinary history. The impossible task was complete, not because Marcelo had become another Roberto Carlos, but because he had shown the world that greatness doesn't have to look the same. Sometimes, it creates its own path. Time has a way of changing football. The questions that once seemed impossible eventually answer themselves. Marcelo's journey with Real Madrid came to an end after 16 unforgettable years. During that time, he won 6 La Liga titles, 5 UEFA Champions Leagues, numerous domestic and international trophies, and became one of the most decorated players in the club's history. The teenager once doubted by many had become a Real Madrid captain and a club legend. But Marcelo's story wasn't quite finished. In 2023, he returned home to Fluminense, the club where it had all begun. For many players, returning home is simply a farewell. For Marcelo, it became another chapter of greatness. He helped Fluminense win the Copa Libertadores for the first time in their history, giving the club that had believed in him its greatest ever triumph. It was the perfect ending to an extraordinary career. When people remember Roberto Carlos, They remember power, speed, and one of the greatest left-backs football has ever seen. When people remember Marcelo, they remember joy, creativity, fearlessness, and a player who played the game with a smile. Both wore the famous number 3. Both became legends for Real Madrid and Brazil. But neither needed to be the other. Marcelo never replaced Roberto Carlos. He did something even harder. He made football stop asking who would replace Roberto Carlos, and start asking a new question. Who could ever replace Marcelo? Football is often obsessed with comparisons. Who was better? Who came first? Who replaced who? But sometimes, the greatest players can't be measured that way. Roberto Carlos changed the role of a left-back. Marcelo reinvented it for a new generation. One inspired the other. Together, they set a standard that few have ever reached. From an 18-year-old carrying impossible expectations, to a Real Madrid captain, a 5-time Champions League winner, a Copa Libertadores champion, and one of the most decorated players in football history. Marcelo's career wasn't built on living in someone else's shadow. It was built on creating a legacy that was entirely his own. Years from now, when young left-backs dream of reaching the top, some will still study Roberto Carlos. Others will study Marcelo, because in the end, he didn't just replace a legend. He became one himself. Now it's over to you. If you were building your all-time team and could only choose one, who would you have at left-back? Roberto Carlos or Marcelo? Let us know your choice in the comments below.